The old horse stood alone in the dusty corral, weak, slow, and forgotten. The farmer had already made up his mind. "Tomorrow, we get rid of it," he said coldly. "No use keeping something that can't work anymore." The ranch was quiet, but the ranch hand was not. He had watched that horse every single day. He knew things the others didn't see. The way it still tried to stand tall. The way it refused to give up, even when its legs shook. So when the farmer gave the final order, the ranch hand stepped forward. And what he said next made everyone freeze. Because that useless horse wasn't what they thought it was. There was something about it, something buried in its past, something that could change everything about the ranch, the farmer, and the decision to put it down forever. The morning light spread slowly over Miller Ranch, touching the dry fields and worn wooden fences with a pale gold glow. Dust floated in the air even though nothing was moving, as if the land itself could not settle after so many hard seasons. In the middle of the main corral stood an old horse. It did not pace like the younger animals. It did not react to the sound of footsteps or the distant calls from the barn. It simply stood there, still and quiet, as though it had learned that moving too much only brought more pain. Its coat had faded with time. What was once strong muscle now showed thin lines beneath its skin. One of its back legs trembled slightly whenever it shifted its weight, forcing it to pause after almost every step. Most of the ranch workers passed by without looking at it. Some had stopped noticing it entirely. It had become part of the background, like the fence posts or the water trough. Inside the barn, Farmer John Miller stood with his hands resting on a wooden beam. His face carried the weight of long years spent fighting weather, debt, and broken seasons. He looked out toward the corral without emotion. "That horse has had its time," he said at last. No one asked him to repeat it. Everyone understood. "Tomorrow we put it down." The words were simple, but they carried final weight. There was no anger in his voice. Only decision. Around him, the workers stayed quiet. Some avoided his eyes. Others nodded slightly, not out of agreement but out of habit. On a ranch like this, disagreement rarely changed anything. Out in the yard, Eli Carter stopped what he was doing. He had been tightening a saddle strap when he heard the words. His hands paused, but he did not move right away. Instead, he turned his head slowly toward the corral. The old horse stood there under the open sky. Eli had worked with animals long enough to know when something was simply worn out and when something still held on. There was a difference, even if it was not easy to explain. This horse was not strong anymore. That much was clear. But it was not empty either. Its posture still held a quiet steadiness, as if it had not yet accepted what others had already decided. Eli walked toward the corral without speaking to anyone. The wooden gate creaked as he opened it. The horse turned its head slightly but did not step back. It watched him approach with tired eyes, calm but alert. Eli stopped a few steps away. "You are still here," he said softly. The horse exhaled through its nose and lowered its head a little. He stepped closer and rested a hand on its neck. The skin was warm beneath his palm. Not cold. Not fading. Just tired. Behind him, the barn door opened and closed again. Someone had been watching, though Eli did not turn to see who it was. The decision had already been made by the man in charge. But standing there in the quiet corral, Eli felt something that did not match that decision. The sun continued its slow rise, casting longer shadows across the ranch. And in the stillness of that morning, Eli began to feel that what was about to happen tomorrow was not as simple as everyone believed. By the time the sun climbed higher, Miller Ranch had already settled into its daily rhythm, but something felt different beneath the surface. Word travels fast in places like this, and by mid-morning most of the workers knew what had been decided. The old horse would not see another week. Some accepted it without question. Others avoided speaking about it at all. On a ranch where hard choices kept everyone alive, emotions were often pushed aside before they could slow a man down. Farmer Miller moved through the yard with steady purpose. He checked fences, spoke briefly with two workers, and reviewed supplies near the barn. Nothing in his face changed. The decision was not new to him. It had already been made in his mind long before he spoke it aloud. Eli Carter worked near the saddle racks, but his attention kept drifting back to the corral. Every time he looked, The horse was still there, standing, waiting, breathing slow and steady as if time meant very little to it. It did not fight its place. It did not collapse. It simply remained. That quiet presence bothered Eli more than he expected. Near midday, Foreman Ray approached him. Ray was older, practical, and known for keeping things simple. "You heard about tomorrow," Ray said. Eli nodded without looking up. "It is better this way," Ray added. "No sense letting something suffer longer than it has to." Eli tightened a strap and paused. "Suffer is not the same as finished." Ray gave a short look, half tired, half annoyed. "It is a horse, Eli, not a person." Eli finally met his eyes. "That does not make it nothing." Ray shook his head slowly. "Do not let this become your problem. The boss already decided." And with that, he walked away. Later that evening, when the ranch began to quiet and most of the workers had moved toward supper, Eli returned to the corral alone. The sky had turned soft with fading light, and long shadows stretched across the ground. The horse stood in the same place. Eli leaned against the fence. "You are not fighting it," he said quietly. "That is what makes this harder." The horse shifted its weight slightly and let out a low breath. It did not respond in any way a human would understand, but it acknowledged him in its own stillness. Eli noticed something new then. A mark near its shoulder. Faded but visible. Not the kind left by age or simple labor. He stepped closer, studying it. It looked like an old injury. Healed, but deep enough to leave a story behind it. He ran his fingers lightly over the area. The horse did not flinch. Behind him, somewhere near the barn, a door closed. Eli turned his head slightly, but no one was there when he looked. The ranch was growing quiet now. Too quiet in a way that made small sounds feel louder than they should. Eli stayed by the corral a little longer than he meant to, and as the last light disappeared behind the hills, he began to wonder something he had not allowed himself to think before. This horse might not be waiting for an end. It might be waiting for someone to remember what it once was. The next morning came with a colder wind moving across Miller Ranch. The sky was clear, but the air carried a sharp edge that made every sound travel farther than usual. Eli woke before the others. He could not shake what he had seen the night before. The mark on the horse's shoulder kept returning to his thoughts, as if it was asking to be understood. Before heading out, he made a decision to check something he had ignored until now. The ranch kept records in a small room behind the barn. Most of it was simple paperwork. Livestock counts. Supply lists. Purchase notes written in faded ink. Eli found the folder for the old horse quickly. It was thinner than he expected. He opened it and read the first line. Transferred after incident. No further assignment. That was all. No details. No explanation. No history. Eli frowned and read it again more slowly, as if the words might change. They did not. He stepped outside and found one of the older hands near the water trough. "Do you know where that horse came from?" Eli asked. The man hesitated before answering. "It was here before most of us. Came in with a freight team years back." "What happened to the team?" The man looked toward the ground. "Storm hit Red Canyon. Wagons broke apart. People got hurt." Eli waited. The man continued. "That horse came back alone." Eli felt something tighten in his chest. "Alone?" The man nodded once. "That is what they said. After that, it never went back to freight work." "And the people?" Eli asked. The man shook his head. "Some never made it. Some were brought back later. No one talks about it much." He walked away after that, leaving Eli standing near the trough with more questions than answers. By late morning, the ranch felt heavier. Even the workers who had accepted the farmer's decision seemed quieter than before. It was as if the air itself knew something was coming. Eli returned to the corral. The horse was lying down now. Not in distress, but in rest. Its breathing was slow and steady. Its eyes opened when Eli approached but did not move otherwise. Eli knelt beside it. "You carried people back," he said softly. "And no one said your name after that." The horse blinked once. He stayed there for a long time, thinking about what he had learned. A freight collapse. Injured riders. A storm that swallowed tracks and time. A horse that returned alone without recognition. Behind him, the sound of boots broke the silence. Multiple footsteps. Eli turned slowly. Farmer Miller stood at the edge of the corral with Foreman Ray and 2 other workers behind him. Their expressions were serious, but controlled. The decision had moved from words into action. "It is time," Miller said. No anger. No hesitation. Just finality. One of the workers carried a rope coiled neatly in his hands. Eli stood up slowly, looking between them and the horse. The old animal had risen again. It stood quietly now, watching the group without fear, only awareness. Something inside Eli shifted. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to certainty. He stepped forward before anyone else could move. "Wait," he said. Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. Eli looked at the horse, then back at the men. "There is more to this than we are seeing," he said. "And if we act now, we may be wrong in a way we cannot undo." The corral fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause for a moment. And for the first time since the decision was made, someone on Miller Ranch had chosen to speak against it. The corral felt smaller with everyone standing around it. Farmer Miller stayed at the front, his arms crossed, his face steady in a way that showed he had already carried this decision for too long to question it now. Behind him, Ray and the others waited, the rope still coiled in one man's hands. The old horse stood quietly in the center. It did not move away. It did not resist. It simply watched them all as if it understood every word that had been spoken since the beginning. Eli stepped forward again. "I am asking you to stop for a moment," he said. Miller looked at him directly. "This is not your decision." "I know," Eli answered. "But I have seen something you have not." A worker shifted uncomfortably. Another looked toward the ground. Ray sighed. "Eli, this is not the time." Eli did not look away. "If we are wrong, we do not get to fix it later." Miller's expression hardened slightly. "We are not talking about a man. We are talking about a horse that cannot work anymore." Eli nodded once. "I understand that." He turned slightly and pointed toward the animal. "But I also understand what it survived." A few of the men exchanged looks. Miller stepped closer. "Speak clearly." Eli took a slow breath. "That horse did not simply return from Red Canyon alone," he said. "It returned after carrying injured riders through a broken freight collapse. It brought people out of that canyon when the wagons failed." The rope in the worker's hands loosened slightly without him noticing. Ray frowned. Stories change over time. People exaggerate things like that. Eli shook his head. "I checked the records. It was part of a freight team. There was a storm. Wagons were destroyed. That part is true. What was never recorded properly is what happened after." Miller's eyes narrowed again. "And what exactly are you saying happened after?" Eli stepped closer to the fence, closer to the horse. "I am saying this animal came back alone not because it ran away," he said, "but because it stayed behind long enough to bring people out before anything else." Silence spread across the group. The horse shifted slightly, lowering its head for a moment before lifting it again. Eli continued, his voice steady. "That scar on its shoulder is not from neglect. It is from impact. Something heavy. Something that would have taken strength to survive and continue moving after." One of the younger workers finally spoke. "You are saying it saved people?" Eli nodded. "Yes." No one responded immediately. The idea did not fit easily into what they had assumed. It did not match the image of what they had already accepted. Miller looked at the horse for a long time. Not with anger now. Not even with certainty. Something else was there. Uncertainty. Ray stepped closer to Miller and lowered his voice. "We still do not know everything. Even if that is true, it does not change the fact that it cannot work now." Eli heard him. "I am not asking you to ignore reality," Eli said. "I am asking you to see it fully." The wind moved through the corral, pushing dust lightly across the ground. The horse remained still. Miller finally spoke again, but slower this time. "If what you are saying is true," he said, "why was none of this recorded properly?" Eli looked at him. "Because after the storm, there was no one left who cared enough to write it down correctly." That answer seemed to settle into the air. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Miller turned slightly, looking at the rope in the worker's hands. "Put it away," he said. The worker hesitated. "Now," Miller repeated. The rope was lowered. Ray looked surprised. "So what happens now?" Miller did not answer immediately. He looked at the horse again, then at Eli. "We wait," he said finally. The word felt heavy in the space around them. Eli did not move. "Wait for what?" Miller kept his eyes on the animal. "Until I understand whether I am making a decision about something finished," he said slowly, "or something that still has more to tell us." The corral fell quiet again. But this silence was different from before. It was no longer a conclusion. It was the beginning of doubt. The days that followed did not bring a clear answer, only a slower rhythm to the ranch. The rope stayed in the barn untouched. Farmer Miller did not speak again about ending the horse's life. Instead, he watched from a distance, as if trying to understand something he had already decided was simple. Eli continued to care for the animal. He cleaned its shoulder, fed it carefully, and spent quiet hours beside it in the corral. The horse did not become young again, and it did not regain strength in the way it once had. But it began to move with more steadiness, as if being seen again gave it a reason to remain upright. One afternoon, Miller finally walked into the corral alone. He stopped a few steps away from the horse. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. "I spent my life believing usefulness was the only thing that mattered," he said. Eli stood nearby but did not interrupt. Miller looked at the animal. "Maybe I stopped seeing anything beyond that." The horse shifted slightly but stayed calm. Miller exhaled slowly. "I do not know what you were," he said. "But I know what you are not. You are not just waste." A long silence followed. Then he turned and walked out of the corral. Weeks passed. The horse was never forced to work again, but it remained on the ranch. Workers began to treat it differently, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. Sometimes children from nearby farms came just to see it standing in the corral, still and patient against the wind. Eli would often stand beside the fence and watch it face the open land. He never knew everything the horse had lived through, but he learned enough to understand one simple truth. Not everything that slows down is finished. Some things are still carrying stories no one has fully heard yet. The old horse stayed at Miller Ranch long after the decision was forgotten. It never became young again, and it never returned to the work it once did, but something had changed in the way people looked at it. What was once seen as useless had become something people paused to understand. And sometimes, that is all it takes to change the ending of a life. If this story moved you, like the video and let us know what you felt about it. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more emotional ranch stories, powerful character journeys, and stories that stay with you long after they end. Comment below. Do you think the ranch hand did the right thing by speaking up for the horse? Share this story with someone who believes that every life deserves to be understood before it is judged. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest lives carry the deepest stories.